I love what's happened with CruiserFest. I love how it just gets bigger and better every year. I love the expertise that this event is able to attract. Let me take a minute now and I'll introduce our first presenter today, Michael Glover, CEO of Fieldcraft Survival. Michael is a former Sergeant Major in Special Forces. Mike founded Fieldcraft Survival with the intent to educate, train, and equip people to survive in worst-case scenarios. He's an expert in security, crisis management, and counterterrorism, and he brings 18 years of Army training to being to outdoors and overland travel. So, Michael, come on up. Thankful to hear from you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And I'm a Land Cruiser guy. I'm also a Land Cruiser guy. So I'm not perpetrating here. I have a 40, an 80, what else do I have? A 100 and the 79 series conversion, which I pretend like it's a 105 or a newer one, which it's not. I want to say thank you for taking the time to come here. This is an amazing opportunity. They had me at Land Cruiser, and you say Land Cruiser, anything, I'm in. But it's cool to see the crossover of community coming together for things like this. I mean, Fieldcraft Survival, my company, which I'll get into a little bit, does the same thing in a similar way where when people are brought together for something like, I don't know, a Land Cruiser or survival or preparedness, it's a positive experience. And it's more chances for us to get off our cell phones and actually engage in person, like we used to, like 10 years ago, right? That for me is amazing, but also inspiring to see people, you know, wiping off the dust and taking their family out on an overland adventure and engaging with their family. As a father of two very young children, last night, I'll tell you about my night last night. So my daughter yesterday afternoon says, she's 3 years old, but she's very vocal. She's half Asian, she's tiger. She's got the tiger mom in her. And she's like, I want drums. And I don't know where that came from. She saw a music video or something. And I'm like, I'm gonna get you drums. Except all my cars, including the 1980 Targa Porsche, can't fit a drum set in it. I didn't realize that until I actually tried to put the drum set in it. And then, so I swapped the vehicle, but my truck is out. We're doing an overland kind of deal in Spanish Fork with Casey Highlights. And I have a Subaru. It's a WRX STI. I race rally part-time. And it's my recce car. So I'm like, this is perfect, except the drum set didn't fit in that either. So I had to break it down drum by drum because I didn't realize, I thought it was like one bongo drum. It's 5 drums coming in a set. And so I had to break down on the drums and build it in the parking lot. And 6 hours later, from Heber to multiple trips down in the valley, my daughter beat the drums until like midnight last night. But it was amazing, right? It was an amazing experience. So for me, life is about my children. Life is about these interpersonal experiences and building community. I started my experience in the military. A lot of you guys might follow Fieldcraft or kind of know my background, so I won't bore you to death. But I was a military guy, grew up in a military family, and at the age of 17 decided I wanted to serve. Back in the day in a military family, that was the only option. College is not even something that we even considered. I mean, I couldn't afford to go to college growing up in a mobile trailer park in Florida anyway. So the infantry it was, except when I went in the Army, there was no war going on. And even though I was playing soldier in the field, in my backyard, and then doing all the training, Ranger School, Airborne School, all this high-speed stuff, it was before 9/11. Like many of you in the room, because I think most Land Cruiser owners are a little older, when 9/11 happened, it changed everything for a lot of people. Whether or not you served or not, even your perspective on things changed. September 12th and the mentality we had was very different, right? We were a different country back then than September 10th, right? We were united. I felt like being a part of the community was something that you aspired to be. You were proud, you were a patriot. And we didn't have a lot of division. because social media really wasn't a thing. Now, we've migrated off path, off track. After my military experience of special operations time, working from an E6, a young staff sergeant Green Beret, all the way to a sergeant major in special operations, I had a lot of experiences. And a lot of those experiences included Land Cruisers. In war, I saw a lot of things that I didn't want to happen to this country or to individuals in this country. After my special operations time, I contracted for the Global Response Staff Office of the CIA. If you've seen the movie 13 Hours in Benghazi, one of those guys. I did that for 3 years. It was a great job, great opportunity, and got to see a lot of the world. But at some point in my life, I said, man, I want to do something for myself for once. Those that serve, whether you serve in uniform or you serve in your own household, it wears you down. It wears you down. I went into civilian life thinking that there was communities, that there were a brotherhood that I could belong to, but there wasn't. There just wasn't. Being a civilian sucked. It sucks really bad unless you have a faith-based organization, a group of like-minded individuals, a strong family unit. But again, those are the things that are degrading in our society. So when I got out and I started Fieldcraft Survival, I actually started in a small gold mining town called Jackson, California. I don't know if you're familiar with Jackson, but you run through it. Probably don't even know you run through it when you're going to South Lake Tahoe from the California side. I started that company with preparedness in mind. Survival, when you think about survival, you typically think about being naked and afraid in the woods, right? I mean, that's the first thing that comes to my mind. I don't know. But if you're naked and afraid in the woods, you've made a couple of mistakes. Like, you've just stacked mistakes. So I didn't want to be an expert in that kind of survival. I wanted to be an expert in this idea of being prepared, because I figured, you know, in the question for my business plan, I asked myself, why do special operators go out into the world in the worst case scenarios intentionally and come out on top? Like, a lot of people think that being a Green Beret or a Navy SEAL is the most dangerous job in the world. Andy Stump and Jack Carr, my Navy SEAL buddies, will tell you that. But it's not true, because they're trained. They pay attention to detail. They have a culture, a community that focuses on all things preparedness because it's their lifestyle, right? And so in asking that question, looking into the civilian world, I went, how do I do this in a business? And the answer is, like, it's impossible. It's impossible to do that. Like, I never wanted to be the tactical guy. A lot of guys know me as the tactical guy. To be honest, I'm over it. I don't even like guns. I mean, I got guns, but I spent entire life as a Special Forces weapons specialist and an infantryman living that life. I want a Land Cruiser. I want to go camping. Like, those are my interests. I want to spend time with my children. But again, when you have to market yourself in social media space because you don't have $1 million investment in your company, you do those kind of things. You start organically and tell the story. And I had no idea what I was doing. In 2016, I did my first post-Pakistan with the GRS CIA office, where I had to get approval because I was still technically on the books. And then I had to get approval from DOD and the agency to even use the words GRS in a conversation without context. So it was a challenge for me, and it continues to be a challenge if you track anything that's going on with me. On the right, I'm a bad guy. On the left, I'm a bad guy, which tells me I'm right where I need to be, in the middle. I'm a moderate. I'm a libertarian. I just believe in freedom and want to live a life in peace. And I just want people to leave me alone so I can go camping with my family. That's all I want. So when I started Fieldcraft, I started to realize something was happening, similar to what's happening here. People are coming together. They don't know why they're coming together. They just know they are. Because you talk about Porsches in the Land Cruiser Museum. I just had a conversation with a guy. You talk about Land Cruisers. What's your model? What do you do? Where have you overlanded? You get in conversations with Kurt, and you're like, man, this dude knows everything about everything Land Cruiser, like the Bible of Land Cruiser, the encyclopedia of Land Cruiser. This is this guy. You start to meet people, and that's the point of what Fieldcraft became. Sure, we do preparedness training. Sure, we teach you how to survive in the worst case scenarios, but most importantly, we've built a community and culture around the idea of preparedness. And I think that's super impactful. So today, I just wanted to share some experiences in overlanding, giving you pro tips, lessons learned that I've learned the hard way over 15 rotations between special operations and war, and also my CIA trips. When I went to the CIA, man, I didn't realize how difficult the job was until I was not in the uniform, but I was in civilians in a Land Cruiser in the middle of nowhere. My first rotations were Yemen. The vacation destination that everybody wants to go is Yemen, right? And I remember being and feeling very vulnerable because I didn't have a platoon of Rangers ready to come rescue me if something went wrong. It was me, a Glock 17 appendix carried in my waistband, and depending on the vehicle we had, a machine gun in the trunk if we were lucky. And that's kind of like you, minus the machine gun. That's similar to you, because you live in a world that's semi-permissive. You could be backcountry with your family, overlanding, and something catastrophic happens. It could be a flood in Arizona. It could be a hurricane off the southern coast of California, which is happening right now. It could be the loss of the power grid, civil unrest, the list goes on. You are your own first response, which I realized in that scenario I was. So my mindset started to shift because I went, man, I depended so much on this infrastructure that existed, which is similar to you, right? We have this collaborative effort in mind when we collaborate with institutions that provide us with support, because you pay tax. When you pay tax, you got health care. When you pay tax, you have a police department, a fire department. We are used to outsourcing our reliance on other institutions. Not to say that's a bad thing, because it's not. It's actually very optimal in a civil, sovereign society. But what happens when things shift? When natural and man-made catastrophe starts changing things? Where people go, oh, maybe I should have known CPR to save that guy's life. Maybe I should have known the Heimlich maneuver, or how to stop the bleed, or how to self-defend or protect, because then I wouldn't have been that victim. A lot of people tragically wait until the mistake happens, and then maybe even institutionally change all protocol based on that one mistake. You ever been part of that? Like the guy working in the shop gets his finger cut off, and we're like, maybe we should not do that with the bandsaw, right? The law enforcement officer is in a catastrophic scenario, and we go, man, maybe we should think about that. I mean, we all saw what happened in Uvalde, a horrible and tragic circumstance that could have been prevented in multiple ways. One, free-thinking independence. Two, understanding how to be your own first response. Three, educating our children to do the same. And I don't just mean like the self-protection scenario, the self-defense scenario, because a lot of people pay attention to that because that's the more sexy version of catastrophe, even though that sounds like an oxymoron to me. But statistically, you're more likely to be in an accident. I mean, 40,000 Americans die on the roads every year. Interestingly enough, I was taking the Utah driver's license test yesterday, which I failed twice, which is horrible that I failed that test twice. It's open book. And I was just rushing. I was trying to beat records. But a lot of people who live in Utah understand the catastrophes that we are faced with all the time. I mean, 100 yards from my entrance of my shop in Heber City, Utah, 3 women tragically died in a vehicle accident. 2 girls going hiking, 18 years old, seniors in high school. An opposing car gets rear-ended, gets knocked into their lane, they hit it and T-bone it, and the vehicle bursts into flames. It was a Jeep Rubicon. And whether it was the external fuel tank, whether it was the position of where it got impacted, their cars set on fire and they couldn't get out. And they tragically paid with their lives. Did you know it's a Class 3 felony in the state of Utah to not render aid to somebody, to bypass them? Profoundly, like I failed that question. Because I'm like, there's no way that anybody would get charged with a Class 3 felony for bypassing somebody and not rendering aid. But it's a law in the state of Utah, which is great. But outside the law, what is our moral, responsible citizen ethic in all of this? We're learning these skill sets because it's cool, it's sexy. But are we teaching our families? Most significantly, are we supporting our community? I will tell you, one of the reasons I live in the beautiful state of Utah is the community that's here. Some of my best friends, Jack Carr down the road, all the people that work with me at Black Rifle Coffee, profoundly, it's a community of like-minded individuals. But also the people of Utah are amazing, I've seen vehicle accidents where people will stop and gridlock traffic to render aid. I've seen animals running across the road and people freaking out and shutting down traffic, almost getting hit by a car for a cat. But those kind of things are being lost in our society. So when I talk about self-reliance, I want you to think about your ability to cut the umbilical cord from the institution that does all the support for you in the worst case scenario. Because they won't always be there to save you. Who here overlands or goes off-road? Most everybody here, because if you own a Land Cruiser, that's the whole point. So when you do that, you're displaced from the infrastructure that supports you. Every single day in this country, somebody backcountry or off-road dies in this country from those kind of mistakes, not paying attention. I'll go over a couple of things that I recommend as pro tips for, at a minimum, what you should have in your vehicle at all times. I will tell you also, there are experts in this room. Tony, where you at? I believe the owner of OEX as well.
Not the owner, director of military training.
Yeah, the director of military training, a former Green Beret, Tony. OEX does advanced, basic, everything in between, right? For military guys that are going overseas. I didn't have that training. I made the tragic mistakes a lot out in the field in real time. We didn't have that training. That's why these guys stood it up. But I'm not the foremost expert on everything overlanding and everything in this space. But I'll give you my pro tips because I'm doing this every day in my life, specifically for my kids, for my family. One, survival. Survival is the imperative because survival contingencies are what's going to save you. We operate in the military by calling the things that we do in planning contingency-based planning, but we call it a PACE plan, a primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. It's an acronym for just having redundancy. So when I plan for survival, what kills you the fastest in survival scenarios, in austere environments? What do we think?
Water.
Exposure actually kills you the fastest. Exposure to the elements. Most certainly here, especially in Utah, where you see 40 to 50 degree shifts in temperature. I mean, I was elk hunting days ago where it was 100 degrees in the day and it was 50, 40 degrees at night. Those are 50-degree shifts where you can't get enough water. You're sweating profusely, you have short sleeve everything, and then you're going into a scenario where you could actually die of hypothermia. A Mylar space blanket, a bivy sack, the ability to make fire, the ability to keep and maintain your core body temperature are imperative in survival, in and around your vehicle. There's been stories here in Utah where people have displaced from their vehicle in snowstorms, giving up all of the infrastructure, all the insulation that a vehicle provides, going out on foot without a plan and dying in the snow from hypothermia. You could actually die of hypothermia from a bleed, because when you bleed, your core body temperature starts to reduce, and if you go hypothermic, you're just circling the drain, right? So a Mylar space blanket, the ability to maintain your core body temperature are imperative. I heard a lot of people say it, water. How many days can we survive without water? I just did that like subconsciously. I was like, you know the answer. It's 3, right? Generally speaking. but I'm also 230 pounds and made up of butter, a lot of water, and just mix it all up with mashed potatoes. That's me. So a lot of us are not created equal in that sense. Some of us need the hydration. And so if I start to degrade because I'm becoming dehydrated, what also is affected? Your mental capacity, your ability to make good decisions. Everybody in case studies of survival talk about the degradation of their cognition and their ability to think through problems, which obviously complicates bad scenarios and makes them worst case scenarios. The other thing that I recommend you have always is have a plan. Have a plan. A lot of people, when they go out into situations like, I'm going to go off-grid and overland, like, does anybody ever overland and off-road and want to get in front of more people? Does anybody want to go to a city and overland? No, you're trying to displace. But when we have a plan of action, what we have is a process where we're talking about it with our spouse. Like if you're planning your trip and it's on your cell phone and your notes, and that's the extent of your plan, and then you ask your girlfriend, your wife, whoever that's with you, hey, what's the plan? And they go, I don't know, it's on your notes. That's not a plan. A plan needs to be disseminated, but the magic of planning is in the process of planning, we learn the plan, right? I think Eisenhower said it. There's a whole bunch of tacticians who have said it. It's not even the plan that matters. It's the process of making the plan where everybody knows it. I grew up in a ranger culture where as an E1, I was prepared to conduct the operation and meet mission success if everybody in my chain of command went away, right? So you should be prepared to do the same. It's simple. Have the conversation. Like people always ask me like, hey, where does this start? Where does this idea of preparedness start? It starts with a conversation. Because when you have a conversation, you start to identify deficiencies. I'm not looking for proficiency. I'm looking for the weakness in my preparedness game. So let me give you a good example. Who here has a fire plan at your house? Lies. Very few people, unless you're a firefighter, but even firefighters, families don't have fire plans. So what would it take for you to implement a fire plan? A person in your neighborhood having a horrible fire, reading about it in the newspaper? No. The chances of fire are always a risk in your home because you have propane tethered to a stove in your kitchen. You have electricity running through your walls. You have kids in your house. So there's always a risk, right? Oh man, my boy, I have twins, a boy and a girl. My 3-year-old boy, when he sees fire, he lights up. And that scares the hell out of me. Like his eyes just light up. I'm like, oh no, stay away from fire. So when I have a conversation with my spouse, let's say I say, honey, what do we do if the house catches on fire? And she goes, I don't know, I'm looking to you for that. Okay, there's a deficiency. Let's figure this out. Honey, if there's a fire and our kids are upstairs and we're downstairs for some reason, how do we get to them? Oh, we just run up the stairs. What if there's a fire blocking the position between us and them? Well, I don't know. A deficiency. Maybe I need fire blankets. Maybe I need fire extinguishers. Maybe I need to actually look at the 9-volt battery in my smoke detector, right? So it starts with the conversation. Self-protection is a very good one as well. If I say, honey, what if somebody kicked in the front door of our house? What would you do? And the husband typically, oh, look at me. You know what I'd do. I'd handle business. Yeah, but I mean, like you're in your boxers right now. Like you're half naked eating potato chips off your belly. What are you going to do right now? So when we have those kind of situations, we say, hey, realistically, we don't have a plan. Create the plan. Use pace as a component of the plan because always expect things to fail because they will. Speaking from a lot of failures and experiences, it will. The next thing is, which I think is the most important for you to pay attention to, is stop the bleed or first aid. Oh man, when I first started this company, as a Green Beret, and Tony or anybody else in the special operations community can attest to, when I started teaching civilians first aid, my community lost it. I was getting emails and phone calls like, what are you doing teaching tactics and first aid to people? I'm like, first aid? Like, that's what you got, first aid? Like, well, you're teaching stop the bleed over Instagram. I'm like, you could build a Tesla in your garage over a YouTube video. So if I could do that, I could teach somebody how to apply a tourniquet to their arm. It's not that difficult. But a lot of this institutional mentality is we're trying to protect what is ours because there's a certification. There's probably a profit aligned with that. You're not an EMT. You're not a paramedic. I don't need to be a paramedic to apply a tourniquet, right? So when you look at the equipment, a tourniquet, which is $29.99, you can get at fieldcraftsurvival.com, no big deal. I make $8, a horrible margin on that equipment, so we don't make a lot of money. I want you to have tourniquets in your car. How many extremities do you have? You have 4. How many family members you have? You might have a lot. Buy a bucket full of tourniquets and throw them in your Land Cruiser. Just do that. Because in the worst case scenario, if you sever a femoral or brachial artery, and medical professionals understand this, and you're somewhere where you can't get a higher level of care in a short period of time, you could potentially perish. I mean, I have friends who were in Mogadishu, Somalia, October 3rd of '93, who were there with that young ranger that was depicted in Black Hawk Down, who passed away from a receding femoral artery, and he bled out slowly because it was pinched off by his muscles and his tissue. But it's very easy to get that equipment and to put it in your vehicle. That's the #1 recommended piece of equipment. Have a tourniquet to apply to your upper and lower extremities, not your neck, guys. You can't apply a tourniquet to your neck. You get a head laceration and your wife's trying to put a tourniquet around your neck, she's not your first response. So when you look at stop the bleed, though, we have to think about what happens in vehicles. Who here has been off-roading or overlanding and seen an accident? It happens all the time. If for some reason, like every time me and Mike Hernandez, my mobility guy, go out in Arizona, it happens. We have to rescue somebody. I mean, I have a winch just to rescue other people. That's literally the only reason I have that. So when you have stop the bleed, we're thinking about cavitational and puncture wounds, right? Because if something's bleeding internally, we need the gauze, the compression bandage, and please bring some kind of coagulant, some kind of agent, whether it's combat gauze, has the agent in it, that allows a chemical process to stop the bleed. If not, you'll be stuffing toilet paper, not used toilet paper, a fresh roll of toilet paper, please, inside of that wound because you need anything and everything you can get in that wound to stop it. But if you have combat gauze, a coagulant with actual sterile gauze, you could stop the bleed of most puncture wounds, okay? So please have that. Also burns. Vehicle fires are a thing. Vehicle trauma response kits should have some kind of burn protection. You wrap some kind of cloth onto a burn, any medical professionals in here, that will turn into an infection which could kill you post-accident. And also I recommend that you carry SAM splints. The rigidity in SAM splints to isolate and immobilize an extremity wound or any kind of fracture, even the neck, are going to be important when looking for the next level of higher care. Lastly, make sure you have some means of communication. Who are my ham radio guys? All nerds. You're all nerds. I'm a ham radio guy too, but you're all nerds. It is very easy because of COVID. One of the good things that came out of COVID is now to get your ham radio license is a lot easier, right? From the ham radio guys. Also, there's no excuse. Ham radio bans are how first response and major federal agencies that are responsible for catastrophe response are going to communicate. You're going to hear those transmissions. So it's good to have that, not only for transmitting, but also receiving information. Satellite phones. Who here has a sat phone? Have a sat phone. Have a sat phone. The electricity is often tethered to the tower that provides the support to your phone. When you lose that electricity and those towers go down, whether it's deliberate or unintentional, you're going to need the ability to communicate to the satellite that's floating around in space. Something that I've been using recently, which is kind of cool, is Elon Musk's new Starlink system. I use it at my house, and it's faster than my internet. And they have RV versions, which I think they did a limited run of those. But to be able to push data anywhere off grid, away from the infrastructure, is a huge benefit for you, especially when trying to communicate your whereabouts. Guys, I wanted to finish this off by giving you a little story, a war story. And the war story was kind of my start point to the company. It's the reason I actually started Fieldcraft Survival, literally and figuratively, which I'll tell you about. I had a curiosity of why do we survive? Like, what is this thing that allows us to survive? In my special operations career, I was a sniper, I was an assaulter, I was a breacher, I did a whole bunch of stuff in the military. One of the worst years in Iraq was 2006, transitioning into 2007. It was a horrible year. It was actually when we changed tactics from 06 to 07, and we did a surge. There were guys who were spending a year there in combat, and they extended them to 15 and 18 months. For a Green Beret who did mostly 6-month rotations, man, that was hard to stomach, especially for guys who were combat arms and direct contact with the enemy routinely for long periods of time. Like a Green Beret, my job wasn't hard compared to these guys. My job was to go out and kill or capture enemy combatants on the battlefield with my team. I worked for a task force called Task Force 16. Task Force 16, if you're a historical military guy, you would know, because Stanley McChrystal's task force was made up of the most elite operators in the world. Their only sole objective, it wasn't winning hearts and minds, it was killing bad guys. It was winning the war and their segment of it through attrition. Task Force 16 included the 22 SAS, the British. It included Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, the Commanders in Extremis Force, which I was a member of, and Ranger Battalion. They went out every single night prosecuting targets in a deliberate target deck known as an HVT deck, or high value target deck, knocking them all out, one by one. One night in 2007, we got the intel that there was foreign fighters that came out of Libya. It was a pretty impactful call to mission, because anything with foreign fighters is going to be bad. There's low-level guys that you see routinely, and then there's foreign fighters who train in the Green Mountains of Libya getting worked up. They actually do a whole workup, like small unit tactics. They train in combatives. They focus on planning, and then they go to war. And we gave them the canvas for it. So in Iraq, we got the mission that on the border of Syria, there was a foreign fighter safe house, and we kind of perked up. We knew it was going to be a good mission, a good objective. We loaded 4 MH-60 Black Hawk helicopters, 2 MH-6 Little Birds, where you operators ride on the skids, and 2 AH-6 attack helicopter Little Birds. They're like mini Ferraris with guns attached to them. I mean, it's insane, these things. As we loaded up, we have our feet hanging off the, dangling off the helicopter, and we're going to go do what's called an offset. An offset is where you land away from the enemy's ears and eyes, so you could surreptitiously, stealthily maneuver to the objective. At the time, we changed our tactics. The B Squadron commander was Tom DiTomaso. Some of you might recognize that name. Tom DiTomaso was a Ranger platoon leader in Black Hawk Down. He later became the B Squadron commander of Delta Force, and then he became the deputy of the unit. An amazing operator, but an amazing planner, and somebody who I trusted with my life. Our entire command staff were these kind of rock stars. He said, guys, we're going to do this new tactic this year, and it's called the call-out. And we were all like, what? Like, is this some secret classified pronoun or proname for what we're going to accomplish? The call-out, what does that mean? He goes, literally, we're going to knock on their doors, and we're going to say, come out with your hands up. And everybody's like, that's impossible. Like, we can't. Like, we kick doors in. That's what we do. we blow doors in, and we meet the enemy head on. And he goes, things have changed. We're not going to do that this year. Now, we had the rules of engagement to dictate our escalation of force, which was violent. So it wasn't just we're just going to stand out there indefinitely. But we're like, okay, noted. We're moving from a surreptitious point 6 to 7 kilometers away from the objective. I think this thing's dying. Is it dying?
A little bit again.
A little bit. I'll go with it. And we go to land the helicopters. If you're in a helicopter, right before it lands, it flares. It's trying to bleed off speed, reduce its thrust. And then we're going to land. And I'm looking out over the horizon in the darkness through night vision goggles, and I see tracer rounds. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like, there's tracer rounds. And my brain cannot process what's happening because I'm like, wait a minute. These tracer rounds aren't going out. They're coming in. I don't understand. Is something ricocheting from our... We're shooting in, they're ricocheting, and they're coming back? This is weird. And then my brain's like, oh, we're getting shot at. That's anti-aircraft machine gun fire from the ground in tracer rounds. So bad guys set up a Dishka, basically a 50 cal, a Russia 50 cal. They set it up on an intersection, and they try to shoot our helicopters out of the sky. They didn't plan for the Ferrari with machine guns to be there. And as these tracers get off a burst between my helicopter and the helicopter in front of us, the AH-6 attack helicopter, Little Bird, peels off from the Task Force 160th, the Night Stalkers, the best operating unit in the world, and cleans house. 6 enemy combatants right out the gate. And we're like, oh, this isn't normal. Like, we're used to having the tactical advantage here. Like, we're getting shot at? Oh, that's weird. We all land, and we're thinking compromise, because the enemy knows we're here. What's going to happen now? Prep with fires, do something else. And they watch the target, because they have the ability to watch the target with ISR, surveillance. And they say, nothing has changed, continue mission. We're like, oh, okay. We're just walking to the target now. Okay, I got it. So we get assembled, we get in our formation, we start walking to the objective, and we set what's called containment, surrounding the objective. And I'm thinking, man, these guys got to know we're here. I mean, we just dumped 6 guys at an intersection that were probably their guys, which we found out later they were. They were the early warning guys. They're bodyguards, which they didn't do good job. So we get set and contained, and we start and initiate the call out. A call out is initiated with a bullhorn. Like, there's nothing secret about this. It's like, what? And so the guy's on a bullhorn saying, come out with your hands up, and they come out, except their hands weren't up. They had chest rigs with suicide vests. They had machine guns, grenades. They had watches that were timed and synced to each other. One guy had a pair of Merrill. Another guy had a pair of Solo hiking boots. I'm like, do these guys got an REI in Libya that I don't know about? Like, what's going on? And so these guys pour out of the objective, and they start fighting. And we want to fight, but we're not used to the fight, because we're used to tactical disadvantage. We're used to having the advantage, and they have the disadvantage. They wanted to fight. So we get to a point where I'm behind a berm, I'm throwing fragmentation grenades. Here's a great little caveat. I had a new guy who was a machine gunner, and he actually asked me behind the berm while I'm throwing grenades, Mike, can I throw a grenade? And I'm like, don't ever ask me that again. Please throw your grenades if you have one. And so he calls, this is so funny, this guy. Oh man, I'll never forget this guy. So he pulls the pin and he throws it and calls frag out, and I'm just like waiting, and nothing happens. And I'm like, you didn't release the thumb safety thing, did you? And he's like, there's a thumb safety thing? I'm like, come on, man. What are you doing here? I actually confiscated his grenades off his kit right then and there. So we're going through this gunfight, and it's just a typical kind of thing that happens in special operations. And we get to a point where we're backed off the objective. Because we realized these guys were a formidable foe, we need to use close air support. And my stepfather was a Vietnam door gunner on a Spectre gunship. Actually got shot in the door while door gunning in Vietnam in a C-130, which is like, what? Is that even possible? These guys are the best at the job. But one thing we didn't account for is the 105s that we got brought in were deeply penetrating the mud and then exploding. So it wasn't having a profound effect on bad guys because they were still there and they were still alive. It was a horrible situation to be in, thinking the gunfight's over, and it wasn't. They told us that there was guys in the reeds. It was low grass reeds. We were exposed in the open. And they said, we need to use a Delta Force dog. We need to bring our dog up. And this dog's name was Vinny. And they brought Vinny up, and he was standing next to me, and Rob Laura, one of my good friends, one of my best friends, was standing next to me on the left side. And we went gun up, and we started to maneuver towards the heat signature of where the aircraft identified him. So as we get closer, he tells us to stop. And I'm thinking, hey, just shoot in the area. But not thinking, because I was a young, dumb operator, one of the guys is like, dude, don't do that. Like, they have vests on. I just confirmed that they have vests on. That would be very bad. I said, Roger. We backed off. Vinny came forward, and they sent Vinny on the line. I remember looking at him probably from here to the wall that's back there, about 15 meters, about 20 meters away, and seeing him run around. And remember, this isn't like a Chihuahua. This isn't like a normal dog. This thing is like an alpha apex predator. And his name was Vinny, and he didn't look like a Vinny. He looked like a Clyde. Just a beast. But he was one of those dogs that you could actually pet when you came off the objective, but you were you were like, oh, we're friends. And he would just like look at you like, we're friends. But you just see him thrash. And he was bred for operating. All those dogs are. So he runs around in a circle, and I'm getting impatient. I'm like, Rick, let's just go up there. And he's like, no, he's got something. Because obviously he could read behavioral indication that the dog is sensing something. I see Vinny jump up in the air and pounce down like an Arctic fox on prey. And I heard a scream. I also heard a gunshot, and I heard and felt an explosion. Vinny just got clacked off on by a suicide bomber, sacrificing his life. He yelled, he screamed, and yelped, and Rick was like trying to recall him. Come back, come back, come back. And me and Rob, I remember running forward, and Rick grabbing the handles on the back of our Paraclete body armor and ripping us back, almost ripping the nods off my helmets. And he pulled us back and drug us back, and we didn't want to say anything out loud because we didn't want to give away our position. And he said, that's what they're there for. That's what they're there for. And we backed up. We decimated the whole objective. Vinny lost his life. We had operators that were shot, that were wounded, but we all came home. We loaded the aircraft. I actually pulled off the American flag because we recovered Vinny's body, put the American flag on his body behind me in the helicopter. And I remember this feeling where the sun was coming up and the building is on fire, because at that point we decided the gloves are coming off. We decimated the objective. There was a vehicle-borne IED inside the driveway that was detonated. There was 13 foreign fighters with suicide vests. There was a cache inside the house. There was a machine gun pointed at the front door, ready for us to kick in the door like we normally did. And there was mortars booby-trapped at every threshold. They knew we were coming. The whole thing was a setup. And had not Tom DiTomaso, Lieutenant Colonel then, Tom DiTomaso, adapted at the speed of war, we would have all probably lost our lives. I remember standing out in this open field as the building was burning. Our nods were up by this time, and the helicopters we knew were coming inbound. But they were still doing gun runs on the house to make sure nothing existed. The Little Birds use American-friendly forces as their position to go up in the air, bump out their butts, and then do their gun runs, which means you get rained on by brass, which is a great indication that they're on their mark, but also an indication that you're going to burn all of your neck and your face and your hands. But I remember looking across the field of guys as brass is falling on us and thinking, ironically, for most people's experiences, this is exactly where I want to be. There's no place on earth I would rather be. And we flew back to base, and I remember coming back, we were napping the earth because 160th hates flying in the daylight because that's when they get shot down. So we're not even 100 feet off the deck. And we go to bank into MSS Fernandez, which is our base of operations. And I remember all the young Army guys and gals that operate the base, the support people, that all have their Army uniforms on, either their Army PT uniforms or physical training uniforms or their camo uniforms, and they're just getting their chow, their breakfast. And they have styrofoam containers stacked, and they're walking out of the chow hall. And I remember a kid coming out of the chow hall and looking up and almost dropping his chow as we were banking in, and I'm looking between my feet, covered in blood, not my blood, covered in blood, thinking to myself, man, what varied experiences between me and you. We land on the deck, not in a condescending way, but just in a, man, this is the reality of what we're facing. This is the reality of the culture that we're in. When we landed, we pulled Vinny's body off, and one of the most profound things I've ever witnessed outside of American casualties that were respected on the battlefield, we pulled Vinny's body off, and everybody in the task force was there saluting Vinny as we transported him from the helicopter to the base. Every 2-2 SAS operator, every Delta Force operator, every SEAL Team 6 operator, every Ranger Battalion young operator was there to salute Vinny coming off of that bird. And that was, for me, a profound experience. And the reason I share that with you is because that's what made me think about this idea of what's missing in our society. Because when I left that culture, when I left that society, I still sought that experience of feeling important, feeling purposeful, feeling mission-driven, feeling like I belonged to something, feeling loved. And I got out, and the realization was it didn't exist. So profoundly, what I've realized outside of the business plan that's Fieldcraft Survival, with the profit and the loss and the gains and all of this crap, what's most impactful is the ability to bring people together and get back to the roots of us, the primal and ancestral roots of us. These engagements where we're looking each other in the eyes, where we're building relationships that are tethered in friendships that allow us to be more prepared, more self-reliant, but more of a community. I think in closing, what's most profound about this experience is that a really cool vehicle made of steel from Japan can bring people together. When people who have creative minds and understand the purpose and what that means, they could build something like this. And that means a lot in a virtual world that we live in tethered to our phones. The visceral feeling of running, I don't think you could touch these things, don't touch them. But running your fingers down a Land Cruiser that's rusted out and how beautiful that looks, and see somebody across the way smiling at that same Land Cruiser and building a relationship, it's amazing. It's amazing. So that profound purpose that I felt like I was missing, I found. I found it here. I found it last night watching my baby girl keep me up until midnight beating on those drums. And I find it every day at Fieldcraft Survival, my company. I want to say thank you so much for listening to me run my mouth this morning. I appreciate everybody at the museum. Kurt, thank you for thinking about me. And enjoy all this is, because it's a lot bigger than just a Land Cruiser. Thank you, guys.
Would you be open for some Q&A?
Of course, yeah.
Thanks, Mike. That was wonderful. I was on the edge of my seat the whole time, and I'm sure that's just the tip of the iceberg. You could probably go on for a long time with great stories. He has graciously agreed to take a few questions, if anybody has any questions for him.
Awesome. That's the easiest kind.
I'm not sure this was stated, but Mike has a wonderful YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And you will learn a huge amount if you go there. And it's equally applicable to your 16-year-old kid as it is to all of us adults. So,
Yeah.
just a comment.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, he just plugged my YouTube channel. I'll get you back later. No, we at Fieldcraft Survival, I'm bad at plugging the company. Wes will probably criticize me later about this. Fieldcraftsurvival.com, Fieldcraft. Look, my business strategy is value proposition, giving you the training and education as much as possible for free. Because if we have the experience and we could talk about it, it doesn't cost a lot of money for us to run our mouths. We put that out and you understand like, man, this is something I want to get into. This idea of preparedness is kind of interesting to me. Look at us as one of the opportunities to make you trained or to give you education on it. It's a podcast. I have Mike Force podcast, Fieldcraft Survival podcast, and then Fieldcraft Survival YouTube channel as well. Yeah, thank you so much, guys. Thank you. Yeah, I think that was it. Awesome. Awesome.
Hey, Mike, I have a question for you.
Oh, now.
What's your favorite off-road drive trail overland to go on? So they all know where to follow.
Ooh. That's a good one. Has anybody been to California Pass in near Durango, Colorado? Yeah. Ouray, it's like the backcountry of Ouray, Colorado. It's super scary, super sketchy. You'll always see somebody roll back there. There's a lot of famous YouTubers that put out the content of people having accidents back there. Does anybody know the elevation of California Pass or that area? It's like
It's over 10.
it's over 10.
Yeah.
But for me, that is the most beautiful part of this country that's kind of remote. You won't see a lot of people back there because not a lot of vehicles can get back there. If you can get back there, it'd be worth the time and effort. Start in Silver Springs? Silverton, sorry. Start in Silverton, end in Ouray at the brewery in the backcountry. And it'll be, end at the brewery. Don't start at the brewery. You'll drive in reverse if you start at the brewery. Yeah.
That's the right way.
Yeah. Is that the right way? Silverton to Ouray?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's it.
So stock your first aid tips and your survival kit first.
Yeah, train with OEX on recovery and maintenance, and then, yeah, definitely do that. But yeah, thanks for that question.
So you heard about fixing your
He needs to fix, I have some work that needs to be done.
But throw your heart, what's your favorite Land Cruiser? You've got a cool fleet.
So my favorite one is the 79 series, which is the Japanese fire truck you see here. I got it from a guy you would, Alex, yep. And we chopped it, put a newer series front end on it. The 18Z, if anybody's familiar with the 18Z, we added the turbo to that. And the garage shop that I always like plugging these guys. Fit Garage. But if you want to nerd out on that kind of stuff, with a whole bunch of nerds, because they're all nerds, Fit Garage in Oregon, in Bend, Oregon, are the guys that did the work. They chopped the top. We pulled out the water tank stuff, and then we put on a truck bed, and it's a right-hand drive 18Z, but it has the ability at highway speed to not get killed coming down from Heber. It's an amazing vehicle. It's my favorite Land Cruiser, solid axles, front and rear. I also like, I'm selfishly, because I like to be cozy now, I like my LC100. I have a 2006, which is the year, I believe, to get 6 and 7, because it has the, and I deleted the, what's that suspension system called?
Auto height control,
AHC, the auto height control, and just went old emu on it. And that thing with my family, that's one of my favorite vehicles. But I'm in the market right now for an LC200. I wasn't going to buy a Clay Cross for 120 grand, but I'm super interested in that market because I think after a CIA experiences, mostly with Land Cruisers, the most indestructible vehicle that I've operated in. I mean, bulletproof. I've done high-risk meets with Al-Qaeda operatives in Land Cruisers, and the good ones, the ones that are turned, not actual AQ guys. But the Land Cruiser 100 series and 200 series we used exclusively overseas, and those are the best vehicles I've ever seen operate in the world. I mean, if you've seen any of the ISIS footage of them moving from Libya to Mali, they didn't steal Dodge Ram pickup trucks. They stole the Land Cruisers and made their way to Mali. They're the most reliable vehicles on the planet. I love it. Yeah. Cool. Thanks, guys. Thanks. Yeah.